Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and a little bit different product type for you today. That's right, it's a speaker amp, the SMSL VMV A1 Pro. This is right about $500 US. This was sent to me directly from Aoshida Audio. Aoshida has asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation of this product. They have made no attempt to influence my opinion, and the only thing they asked in return, of course, is that fair and honest evaluation and an affiliate link. So the link that you see down in the description below where you can buy this from Aoshida will be an affiliate link. If you like what I have to say about this amp and you want to buy it, please consider using that affiliate link. I will get a small kickback, and I only use affiliate link money to keep the channel running. As far as I know, I get to keep this amp. That has typically been the case with Aoshida products that they send me here as well. But again, I'm going to do my best to be as thorough and as honest as I can with you. And part of that honesty is to tell you that if you are unfamiliar with my channel, because this is a speaker amplifier, and I am primarily a headphone system reviewer in the audio space. So potential new audience here. Hello, welcome. I'm Wave Theory on this. So I am a little bit less experienced in listening to speakers and testing speaker-based gear. And so just keep that in mind as we go through this review here too. Again, just trying to declare everything and be as honest with you as I can be. But this was an interesting experience, and this was an interesting amplifier to get to know, and it's also based on this new gallium nitride technology, which we will discuss briefly here. But first, we've got to pay some bills, so let's do shameless self-promotion.
Hi, it's me again, 14 months later and a whole foot taller. Now, since Wave Theory liked the first 10,000 subscriber play button I made him, maybe he wants a 25,000 subscriber play button. This can only happen if you subscribe, though. Now, since over 60% of the watch time comes from unsubscribed viewers, I'm going to need you to subscribe. You can also sign up for his Patreon or send him money in PayPal. Links in the description. Now, on to the video.
As I said in the intro, this being a speaker amp means that we may have attracted some new audience members out there who are into the two-channel game in audio. And again, I have been mostly a headphone reviewer, but I just want to say welcome. I am Wave Theory. I do my best to give you as thorough and as honest reviews as I can. And so one of the consequences of doing so is that sometimes I get a bit long-winded, so we could be here for a while. So I also timestamp out my videos and jump around and look at the parts that are most relevant to you as you make a decision as to whether or not this amplifier is right for you. All right, and to my returning headphone audience out there, I did try this with headphones. We'll talk about what that looked like here as the review progresses. But also, this gallium nitride tech that we'll talk about here is making big waves in speaker amplifiers. And again, to my headphone audience there, it would not surprise me if fairly soon we start getting headphone amplifiers, amps specifically made to drive headphones out there using the same tech. That seems rather inevitable, so we might want to keep an eye on this gallium nitride stuff and see what it's all about as well. Okay, so then about the SMSL VMV A1 Pro. Again, it is a gallium nitride based amplifier that uses these new, they call them GaNFET transistors. And I'm not going to go into super detail on what that means other than to say that this is a switching amplifier. And the thing about these gallium nitride transistors and the gallium nitride approach here is that the switching happens at a much higher frequency than switching amps of old, let's call them, okay? Meaning chip-based amplifiers, right? And so older chip-based amplifiers often did the switching at like 440 some kilohertz or something like that. And here, SMSL's website claims that the switching happens upwards of 1 megahertz. And the claim is that allows for a cleaner and more accurate reproduction of the audio signal. Okay, Whether or not that's true, I don't really know. That is the claim. I'm going to let my ears do some of the testing of that claim, and then I'm going to report some of the results that I get here in comparison to some other amps out there. Now, to the potentially new audience here in the 2-channel realm, I am not completely disconnected from the speaker market. I do have a 2-channel system in my house that I've listened to some. I will tell you what some of that gear is to get into comparisons here later, but to like kind of talk about like the A1 Pro and where it fits in. Like, I have been a user of a Parasound Zone Amp V3 for a while in some applications, and then I also have some experience. Like my main 2-channel amp right now is like a vintage amp. It's the venerable old Adcom GFA 555 Mark II, and so that has gotten some time in there. And then like I do use some desktop speakers or speakers on my desktop a lot. Those have been driven by an LTA Z10E amplifier in there as well. So yeah, it's not that I have zero experience with speakers. I just have not reviewed them or listened to them as much as headphone-based stuff. And then like I do have a speakers review out there, and that is of the ELAC Unify UB52 speakers. I'll put a link down in the description below there, and I actually still have those speakers around and use them as test gear for the SMSL here as well. Okay. More about the SMSL here as we get rolling. The power specs on this, the power output rating, are kind of eye-popping. Okay, so as a stereo amplifier, they specify 85 watts per channel into an 8-ohm load and 160 watts per channel into a 4-ohm load, which is a lot, right? That is a lot coming from a box this size. There's also the option to run this as a bridged mono amp, buy a pair of these and use them as mono blocks. And if you do that, then the power output spec really goes up to something like 250 watts into an 8-ohm load and 400 watts into a 4-ohm load, which again seems pretty insane for a box this high. And after my listening tests, I have some questions about that. I don't know if it actually performs up at that level of power output, and we'll talk about why that is here as the review unfolds as well. All right, but let's take a quick look at the build and features of this amp beyond the power output specs here, which again are eye-popping and perhaps overly gaudy. We'll see here. Front panel, pretty nice, simple. Okay, easy to look at. You see it's a very compact unit. The black case, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but the black case does leave a lot of fingerprint marks and shows dust easily and all of that. So if you may want to keep your microfiber cloth handy to clean this thing off. But I like this kind of bronze colored accents here of the VMV on the side with this nice little angle cutout in there. That looks good. There's one on the other side here too. All that. You have a pretty simple display right here. It's not powered on. I'll try to do a thumbnail photo that shows that lit up so you can see what that looks like. This knob right here is both a button you push and hold for standby on and off, and then it's a volume control. Okay, here it is like a digital volume control. It uses I'm going to get the model number wrong. I'll put it on the screen, but it uses a chip-based volume control as well. Okay, on there. And then this also will, like, if when it's powered on, you can just tap it to enter the menu mode, and then like use this to select the menu options, tap it again to select, and so forth. There is also a remote control. Okay, that looks like this with shiny black plastic, so hopefully it's not reflecting too much and you can see what it looks like on there. It uses a CR2032 battery that is not included, so you have to install that when you get to the unit, but it's a small, compact machine aluminum remote control that's well built, handles the menu navigation a little bit more easily than the front panel knob use there on the unit there as well. Okay, back panel. We have the stereo set of speaker binding posts here, fairly decent quality 5-way binding posts. Then we also have the inputs. You see we have a stereo pair of RCA single-ended inputs, and then we have a single 3-pin balanced XLR input. And that really is how you select in a lot of ways between stereo and mono mode. If you want to go stereo mode, use the stereo RCA ins. If you want to use this as a bridged mono amplifier, buy a second one of these so that you have the stereo pair, then plug into the XLR balanced output or input here, I should say, and then you're going to connect the speakers differently. If you have the bridged mono, the instructions for that are in the manual, so if you're going to do it that way, follow that carefully. All right, I only have one unit, so I judged this, or will be reviewing this, as a stereo amp. Unfortunately, I did not get to try the bridged mono on here. Okay, I need to comment about the stereo RCA input here. And again, there might be some new viewers out there because this is a 2-channel piece and I have been mostly a headphone reviewer. So if you're not familiar with my channel, let me tell you something about an observation I have made about the audio industry. And this has equal impact on both the headphone and speaker portions of our hobby, just because of this is source chain stuff, source chain specific things. And that is, there is an imbalance in our DAC market right now, particularly under $1,000 US. There is like the vast majority of DACs that you can buy anymore under $1,000 US, where this unit is priced, are balanced DACs, and they sound better from their balanced outputs than they do their single-ended outputs. That is because when the design and part selection goes into building a balanced DAC, some kind of circuit kajiggering has to happen to go from that balanced output to a single-ended output. That circuit kajiggering almost always has a negative impact on the sound. I cannot name a balanced DAC under $1,000 US right now that sounds equally good from its single-ended output as it does from its balanced output. Okay, the closest gap or the smallest gap that I can name is the Shit by Frost 2 right now. Okay, that's the smallest gap, but it's a non-zero gap in the performance quality from that balanced output as compared to its single-ended output, and the gap just gets bigger from there. So that this unit only has a single-ended input on it, if you intend to use it as a stereo amplifier, you need to know right out of the gate that you either have to do the work of finding one of the few single-ended DACs out there, or you need to buy a transformer that goes from XLR output to single-ended output. I have a review of one out there. I will put a link in the description for that. Or you just live with the performance hit, okay? Those are the options. So the input on this hampers the performance ceiling of this unit as a stereo device right out of the gate if you're going to be buying DACs that are like in a similar price range on that. Now, for testing purposes on this, I did use one of those transformers that I talked about so that I can use the balanced output of a DAC in the price range. I also used a headphone amp in between that has preamp outputs, which I'll talk about in a little bit too. And then I also have a Cord Hugo 2 around, which is a high quality single-ended output device. But again, I don't think a whole lot of people are going to be plugging this into a Hugo 2 out in the wild to use as a stereo amp, because the Hugo 2 is far more expensive than this unit. Okay, but that's just something to keep in mind here. Now, I believe the reason why this amp has these inputs in here is because my understanding is it has 2 gallium nitride signal paths in it, which for whatever reason in the circuit design here means that for stereo mode, it can really only be used single-ended. So they just gave single-ended output on that. You have the XLR input. So if you buy 2 of these and use them in bridged mono mode, then you can access the higher quality outputs of most DACs in the price range, right? And get and get that performance that way. You lose volume control on this. So the volume control on this unit only works when it's in stereo mode. If you use it in bridged mono, you will need an external volume control, a preamp of some sort, or a DAC that has a variable output on it, which is just another form of preamp. Okay, so that is something to keep in mind there, that like the system building for this unit, if you intended to use it in stereo mode, is going to be a little bit more difficult, or you're just going to have to live with the performance hit. Okay. It's just something to keep in mind out there. And then if you're going to use it bridged mono, have a preamp, an external volume control of some form. You're going to need it. Okay. But other than that, the unit is well made. Like, this is metal. You can hear it. It doesn't knock too much. Okay, when you tap on the chassis and all of that. It has some heft, but not a lot. Like, there's a switching power supply in it, which contrasts to like the Parasound Zone Amp V3, which is a Class AB amplifier and is heavier than the SMSL is, because like you look inside here, there is a big toroid in there. It's got a toroidal power supply, a toroidal transformer in there on the power supply, whereas again, this just has a linear switching power supply in it, which can sound good, but I think the choice of power supply might be an issue sonically on this unit. We'll get to that. Okay. So I've been talking about a lot of sound things that we will eventually get to. Let's start getting to them. Let's talk about the test gear that I used to listen to this device here. All right. It's a speaker amp, so obviously I used some speakers. I have 3 pair of speakers around that I could easily use to test on this, and they are as such. They are the Definitive Technology SM45, the Yamo C93 Mark II, and then those ELAC Unify UB52s that I mentioned there a little while ago. I used each one of those 3 in like a different setting with this amplifier here. The Def Techs I didn't really use for critical listening. I have 2 sons. You met one in Shameless Self-Promotion. The other one is a little older. He's not really into this whole be on video kind of thing. He just graduated high school, which means that we had a graduation party, which we hosted in our garage, and they wanted music to be played. Okay, his mother and he wanted music to be played, and you know, they were like, "Can you set that up?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can set that up. Okay, I can do that." So I got my SM45s off the shelf, set them up in the garage, connected this to an SMSL DO100 DAC via single-ended output, set up a little streamer that I'm working on a review for and all of that, so that we could do Spotify Connect and just play background music all day long, basically, and just let this play out in the garage on those speakers all day long. And that really, I just mentioned here to say that it had no problem doing that. Filled the garage with sound, even with the main garage doors open. Filled it with sound and barely broke a sweat. It was only mildly warm to the touch when we were done with that. So like on that kind of a stress test, okay, did just fine. All right. For more critical listening, on my desk where I do a lot of my listening for headphones, and then I do a lot of my video editing work and all of that, I have that pair of Yamo C93 Mark II speakers. A variety of DACs DACs and preamps, I should say, got plugged into this. These include, but may not be limited to, big guns, Lampezator Baltic 3 DAC, Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC, run through their balanced outputs through a Jensen Isomax transformer to go from the XLR to the RCA. Okay, and then those 2 DACs would have been fed by Sonor Ultra Rendu streamers. In the case of the Berkeley, that would have been routed through a Singer SU6 DDC. Okay, the Sonor Ultra Rendus are Rune endpoints, and I made sure that for critical listening, I used only lossless or high-res FLAC files, DSD files, either played locally or in the case of FLAC files, streamed from Qobuz all through Rune, okay, in there as well. Okay. Then other more price-appropriate gear got plugged in as well. Like I used the Shit Bifrost 2, and I have the Live Harmony Micro DAC in for review. Those would have been attached to a Cord 2Go plus 2U streamer and DDC setup, coaxial outputs into there, optical inputs, Toastlink optical into either of those for like PC system sounds and like YouTube videos and that sort of thing. And then also like a little bit of gaming just to try it out, just a little bit. And then what else was on there? Again, the test gear list goes long. Oh, Needed a preamp on that because neither of those two DACs have a volume control on them. So I have an Aoun S17 Pro Evo headphone amplifier on my desk. I used the single-ended preamp output of that to go into the SMSL here. And in that case, I cranked the volume of the SMSL all the way up to its maximum level, which is level 70 on its display screen, and then just used the Aoun's volume control to control the volume there. All right. So again, those Yamaha C93 Mark II speakers. I also, though, plugged the speaker output of this into a ZenSonics C-Box 2 speaker amp to headphone out breakout box. It's a slightly upgraded version that has a switch to go from a speaker pass-through to the headphone outputs on that. So see link down in the description where you can read about that box and also the upgrade options that I got for it so you know what's going on there. I'm working on a review for that box too. So the speaker output pass-through of that box would have gone to the Yamos, and then I also tried like my Focal Utopia original and the new Hi-Fi Min Susvara Unveiled as tests here, powering them like from the speaker outputs of this and then using it as a headphone amplifier in that space to like really get a feel for what it was doing, because again, my speakers are not as resolving as those headphones. Okay, my 2-channel rig, I used the Cord Hugo 2 as a DAC and its matching 2Go streamer, again, as a Rune endpoint. RCA outputs of that, it has a volume control on it, so it got used as a preamp here too, with the volume of this, again, set to 70. All right, direct RCA outputs of the Hugo 2 into here, and then this either drove directly those ELAC UB52s that I mentioned, or I also tried to loop my subwoofers in. I successfully did. It wasn't just a try, right? I have a pair of SVS PB1000 subs, so I used the RCA pass-throughs on those to go from Hugo 2 to the subs and then into the RCA outputs of this so that I get the crossovers of the PB100 set at 100 hertz right now, and then powered the speakers off of this and let the subs do their thing too. So I tried those ELACs, then again, both full range off of this and through the subs, and there I also compared, like on the desk, I compared to the Parasound Zone Amp V3. On the 2-channel system, I compared to the Adcom GFA 555 Mark II. Okay, that's a lot of stuff here. Sonic observations. For the most part, you get a lot of cleanliness and clarity. You get a lot of just that clean, clear sound that switching amps are known for. That comes through here. But there's a little bit more life to the sound. There very well could be some benefits to using the gallium nitride transistors. Okay. I do want to say, though, that I did notice with the headphones, okay, in particular, that when I cranked the volume level up to 70 on this amplifier here and then used an external a preamp for volume control, I could hear some 60 hertz hum, particularly in the left channel. So at its maximum volume, there is a little bit of noise that bleeds through. I didn't really notice that on the speakers because it's very low level, but because the headphones are right there, right next to the ear, I could hear it there. And they're open back headphones. So at first I was like, wait, where is that hum coming from? Because it was low level and it sounded a little bit distant. I take the headphones off and the noise disappeared. I put the headphones back on, I could hear it again. So it was definitely coming through this amp, but again, very low level. Okay, on that, but something worth commenting on. Okay, but back to the overall sound being clean and clear. It avoids being analytical to my ears, though. Like, it's still like very neutral in its presentation and its perceived frequency response. Lots of cleanliness, lots of clarity to the sound. But again, not sounding like it's overly done or analytical or clinical or even sterile, right? There is a fair amount of like naturalism to the sound to my ear here. Okay, pretty reasonably so. And again, the perceived frequency response comes across as very flat. For the most part here. Neutral, okay? Kind of like studio neutral kind of perceived frequency response here. And now, like, I'm trying to think, like, where to go next with this because let's talk about the spatial presentation. Imaging and separation laterally, side to side, are pretty good. Soundstage size on a speaker amp I find to be more challenging to judge than on headphone amps, because distance between speakers and all of that has a lot to do with the soundstage size and the presentation. The three-dimensionality, though, is okay. Like, the lateral imaging and separation is strong. The depth dimension is kind of right? And that's true of whether we're talking about the speakers or with the headphones there. There is some depth. It's not quite a wall of sound kind of presentation, but like you can't really reach into the sound stage a whole lot, this way. And I guess that's pretty common for mid-fi pieces, or like a $500 amp. We shouldn't expect too much there. I think that's a holdover in both the headphone and speaker markets here, is that there's only so much $500 amps do on that regard. Okay. And then like resolution and detail retrieval is also pretty solid. With the headphones, I would say that the resolution and detail retrieval is about in line with what a lot of $500-ish headphones do these days. That's the best judge that I can give you there. I think it is slightly more resolving from the mid-range through the treble than the Parasound Zone Amp V3. And it's very similar in resolution to the venerable old Adcom, right? Pretty close there. It has a little bit more natural decay sound to it, particularly in the treble, than I got from the Parasound or the Adcom, though. Sustained cymbal hits. Just one of many examples would just be like the very opening of Material Girl by Madonna, right? Drummer hits a cymbal there and just lets it sustain decay over time. That sustained decay sounded more natural and realistic to me through this amp than it did either the Class AB Parasound Zone Amp V3 or the Adcom GFA 555 Mark II, which I'm just going to call Adcom from here on out because GFA 555 Mark II is just too much to say. All right. So, and I want to specify that's in the mids and the treble where that happens. To me, the sonic issues with the things that you have to be careful of with this VMV A1 Pro, and why I think maybe the power supply is an issue here, comes in bass presence and control. Now, both the Adcom and the Parasound amps that I have named here are Class AB, and they are warmer leaning in their sound. They have a little bit more fullness and richness and weight in the lower mid-range, upper bass regions that give them a sense of warmth and heft to them. They are also bassier amplifiers generally. Like, they controlled the woofers of the speakers and the lower ends of my headphones better than the SMSL did. Okay? And then it switched up, from the mids on up. The A1 Pro started to be more controlled and like clearer and cleaner and more natural and like tone and timbre to me from the mids up through the treble. So vocals and all of that, I think actually sounded better on the SMSL than either of those other two amps. Cymbals better on the SMSL than either of those two other amps. The SMSL also had like better depth to its sound staging than the $350 Parasound did, right? The $350 Parasound is kind of wall of soundy in comparison, both the speakers and headphones there. Okay. And so it's a more expensive amp. It's a newer amp there. The Adcom was still, I think, a little bit better in depth, just a little bit. Okay. Just a little bit. All right. But kind of back to the matter at hand here. The two Class AB amps, even though the Parasound has a lower power rating at 45 watts per channel into 8 ohms, and then of course the big Adcom, which is like 200 watts per channel, it's something pretty insanely high. Okay, they just controlled the bass better, and there was more presence, there was more oomph to the low end of the sound. Okay, whether you're using a sub, where just on my desk I have a Monoprice sub. I'll have to put the model number up, and I use the high level pass through on that, and I could just hear that was like more active and lively from the Parasound than it was from the SMSL. So I would have to boost the volume on that sub to get the SMSL to match what the Parasound was doing in the low end. So that's one hint right there. But like not just like the fullness and weight of the tone of the low end, it was cleaner and clearer in the bass, better texturing and that sort of thing in the low end. And I noticed this particularly with the ADCOM and the ELACs in the main 2-channel setup. When the ELACs were running full range, they were bassier and fuller and harder hitting, noticeably so with the ADCOM than with the SMSL. That's not surprising. What was surprising is like the comparative difference as to when I switched the SVS subs in with either amp. Now, the crossover frequency of the ELACs means that the woofers in them are carrying some vocal information and some mid-range information with them, right? I forget exactly what that crossover is. I looked it up, but it's like in the range where some vocals and mid-range instruments are still going to dip down and be mostly reproduced by the woofer of the ELACs than it is going to be the coaxially mounted mid and tweeters, right? Okay. There was a harshness and a comparative lack of clarity to mid-range instruments, which is again most mid-range instruments, pianos, strings, guitars, scale, and some vocals in there, where like vocals got a little bit harsh and shouty to me when the ELACs were running full range. That was true on both the SMSL amp and the ADCOM amp without the subs. When I put the subs back in, crossed the speakers over at 100 hertz, in both cases, the vocal timbre and the clarity of the mid-range improved. That is in part because, again, when you're asking those woofers and the ELACs you're not asking them to produce the deep sub bass, then their woofers don't have to move in and out as far, and they are there to be more controlled for the higher frequency stuff that they are asked to do, and that just cleans up the sound in entirety. The difference was bigger on the SMSL here, on the A1 Pro, than it was with the ADCOM, though. Okay, so the ADCOM has more power in reserve to control driver motion when in full range. Like, there was still a gap there. The subs still helped. Same difference, just smaller difference with the ADCOM than with this. So I want to come back to the power specs on the A1 Pro here, because they're gaudy when you see them on paper. In practice, I did not find that power on paper to be as potent or as controlling in the low end as either the Class A, B amps that I have, both of which have big toroidal transformers in them. I think it probably comes down to the power supply. My guess is the gallium nitride amplifier circuit is probably perfectly capable of outputting the power that the unit is spec'd at, but the power supply choice that goes into the unit is probably holding it back. And that shows up in the low-end control, okay, when you're asking it to drive speakers full range. You put subs back in, and boy, the clarity jump really moves, is big on this unit when it's not being asked to reproduce that deep sub bass. So those are things to keep in mind there. Okay. My headphone community is going to ask me, how did that original Utopia sound? Does it work? Because the Utopia is one of the most signal chain picky headphones on earth right now. And it was okay. The Utopia didn't hate it. It was just a little bit forward for me in the upper mids, lower treble, which got a little bit fatiguing after, 6-8 tracks are in there. But it wasn't, the Utopia was not as stridently unhappy as it often gets when it's not on a signal chain that it likes there. Okay, so that's something to think about there. All right, summing all of this up, what does this tell me about, and my bottom takeaway on the SMSL VMV A1 Pro speaker amp here? It is a solid amplifier. I wish I could have tried it in dual mono mode just to see what it did there. Maybe that issue that I was talking about with the mid-range control and like the, just the overall clarity and all of that when their, subs were in or out would change a little bit if I could use this in dual mono mode. Okay. So, I mean, it's not perfect. Using it as a stereo amp, you've got to be careful about signal chain building because it only has the single-ended input, and that just does it. That's an awkward fit to the current DAC market here in mid 2025. There's a lot of cleanliness and clarity to the sound. It's very neutral. It's excellent in lateral imaging and separation. It has very good mid-range and treble control to it when it is not asked to also reproduce very deep sub bass. I think sonically the biggest drawback to this amplifier is that despite its gaudy power spec, when you ask it to reproduce really low sub bass and drive speakers full range, it struggles a little bit, and I think it probably comes down to the power supply in here is just maybe a little bit inadequate and probably doesn't deliver the power spec through the whole frequency range that you would think it could based on the on-paper power spec. Okay, but otherwise, it's a pretty decent sounding amp, both for speakers and for headphones if you use an appropriate breakout box. It's compact, it's well made, it does not run very hot, so you can easily put it on a desk and use it in a desk-based system and all of that. And if you have a smaller room and some subwoofers and you're not going to ask it to reproduce deep sub bass, driving speakers full range, then it is a pretty decent 2-channel stereo amp there as well. Okay, so mixed feelings there on the A1 Pro. Can recommend it in certain situations, not really recommend it in others, in my opinion there, but it was fun to get to know it and all of that. So thanks to everyone for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment if you haven't already. I have more speaker amp reviews coming because I also got sent the SMSL PAX and a pair of topping B200s. So yeah, these retailers think they're funny sending speaker amps to a headphone guy, but is what it is. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.